I'm just curious, your opinion. Why did the state legislatures adopt the 17th Amendment?
Why did the state legislatures adopt the 17th Amendment? This is actually kind of off topic, and the answer is somewhat long, but since it's the last question, I'll take it. As everyone in this room probably knows, the original way in which U.S. senators were selected was that the legislature of each state chose the U.S. senators from that state. This system worked very well until about the middle of the 19th century, when de Tocqueville came to America, about, was it 1835. He visited the Capitol, and he made the observation in his book that if you went to the House of Representatives, you saw a bunch of cigar-chomping, tobacco-chewing yahoos. That was the People's Branch. But if you went to the Senate, you saw people who were the equals of any statesman in Europe. And he attributed it to the system of direct election. That is to say, people elect the state legislatures, but the state legislatures elect the senators, which at that time was working very well. Beginning about 1850, however, things began to break down. One of the problems that occurred was deadlock. Often the upper house and the lower house of a state legislature could not agree on who the U.S. senator would be. And the deadlock between the two houses would sometimes go on for months. At one point, I believe the state of Delaware was without any representation in the United States Senate for a year because the legislature could not agree as to who the United States senator should be. Now, under the what's called the Time, Places, and Manner Clause, Article 1, Section 4, Congress has the power to set the method by which U.S. senators can be elected. And Congress could have cured this problem, but unfortunately Congress's only intervention into the election of U.S. senators made the situation worse, actually increased the number of deadlocks. So and very often when there was a deadlock between two outstanding candidates, what they had to do was to break the deadlock by selecting a mediocre candidate. So this is one of the reasons why the state houses, the state legislatures got sick of this system. The second reason had to do with the effect on the general public of the older method of electing U.S. senators. How many people know anything at all about the state legislative elections in Illinois in 1858? What if I mentioned to you Lincoln-Douglas debates? Ring a bell?
Yep.
Stephen Douglas and Abe Lincoln were not running for popular votes. They were running for Senate by encouraging people to vote for Republicans or for Democrats for the legislature. That election was totally dominated by federal issues. People running for state legislatures, and that wasn't just that election, people running for state legislatures couldn't get their message out because what people want to know, who are you going to vote for U.S. Senate? So again, it became very difficult for state legislatures to communicate with the voters about state issues because of the way that U.S. Senate elections overshadowed state legislative elections. And then finally, there was the issue of corruption. Many people who made their pile in the railroads or in the telegraph or in other sorts of businesses decided that having been so successful in business, they would make darn good U.S. senators. And all too often, the way they became U.S. senators or tried to become U.S. senators was by bribing state legislatures. It is a lot easier to bribe a relatively small number of people than to bribe a whole lot of people. It's easier to bribe a legislature than it is to bribe an electorate. That's one of the reasons that Tabor is such a good idea. It is not impossible to bribe an electorate. One could point to the 2012 presidential election, for example, but it is more difficult. In the state of Montana, for example, a man named Robert Clark, very wealthy mining baron, decided he wanted to be Montana's first Republican senator. And so he undertook his campaign by handing over bags of money to virtually every member of the legislature. This was the subject of a national scandal, and the United States Senate forced him to resign, but it was not the only example. And so under the threefold problems of overshadowing state elections, and deadlock, and corruption, the state legislature said, we've had enough. That even though it would reduce our power, we think it would be better off if the people got to vote for U.S. senators directly. And so many state legislatures actually passed laws that they would have straw vote elections. And everybody who became a legislature would be sworn to vote for the victor in the popular straw vote. It was called the Oregon system. And so by the time the 17th Amendment was adopted, many of the people in the U.S. Senate had de facto been elected by the people anyway. So there were, as I suggested, very good reasons for the adoption of the 17th Amendment. Should the amendment have been passed, I leave that up to you. But I do suggest that people who oppose the 17th Amendment need to also come up with, they would like to see it repealed, need to also come up with reasons or methods by which these three problems could be dealt with if we return to the older system. This has been a real pleasure. I want to thank you very much. God bless you.